Hey travelers, we're here in Great Falls, Montana, of all places. So we're live, but not live. So when you're watching this, it'll be about a day late, but we're live right now. So things are going really good here. We're getting a lot of beer education, and part of that beer education is getting to talk to some really great authors, and we have one of them here. So we have Josh Noel. And he wrote the book Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out Goose Island, Anheuser Busch, and How Craft Beer Became Big Business. And I think all of us, and especially our viewers, are very aware of what happened with Goose Island and Anheuser Busch. So just to start off, I was really curious, and I didn't get to ask you yesterday, but what was the motivation behind writing this book?
Well, I'd been covering beer for the Chicago Tribune for a couple of years.
Sure.
At the time of the sale, and in the back of my head, I'd been thinking, craft beer is really starting to take off. It was all the way up to like 2,500 breweries at the time. Of course, now it's like 7,500.
Right.
So it's only continued to take off. But clearly something was happening with craft beer, and it was a really interesting industry. It was a fun industry to write about, but again, even more than fun, it was a fascinating industry, and like this thing was happening, and like there was this movement, and writing newspaper articles was great, but I started to think, well, maybe there's like a book and all this, a longer narrative of what's happening in craft beer, and I wasn't exactly sure of what that was. But then on that March day when Goose Island and Anheuser Busch announced that deal was going down, I thought, maybe there's there's some kind of like book length narrative in this, and I didn't know what it was exactly.
Right.
But soon after the sale, I reached out to the founder of Goose Island, John Hall, and said, I think there might be a book narrative in the Goose Island story, like how it, the Goose Island started in 1988 when there were fewer than 200 breweries nationally, and again, 7,500 now, so that's the growth is crazy. And he took a real chance at a time that craft beer was not the slam dunk that it sort of is now to a degree. And I just felt, and Goose has done a lot of great innovation over the years. Bourbon barrel aged stout, as Goose Island was the first to do that.
Right.
They were early on like Belgian styles in America. They were early on dry hopping. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that Goose Island along the way had done that I felt like would lend itself to a really interesting narrative, a long book-length narrative. And then, of course, the sale to Anheuser Busch was sort of the cherry on the sundae, where it's now you've got. I mean, a narrative is fine. If it's nothing but a happy story, but you need a little bit of tension, a little bit of controversy there to make people really care about a story, right? If you really want a beginning and a middle and an end to a story, it can't all just be sunshine and roses. And the sale to AB was So the sale to AB sort of lent this really fascinating wrinkle to the Goose Island story. So that is a long way of saying that I felt like the Goose Island story was it was a scrappy and upstart story, and then it became the story of sellout and controversy, and people were really and legitimately upset about the sale. So I started down the path just thinking, okay, the Goose Island story is really interesting on a number of fronts, and it's got this sale to Anheuser Busch, and why did that sale happen? What was Goose Island trying to accomplish? What was Anheuser Busch trying to accomplish? Why were people so upset about it? And just all these sort of mile markers along the way, and I just felt there was a really good story there. And then to make my answer even longer, the story got even more interesting because Anheuser Busch kept buying breweries. Goose Island was the first, and then they went on and bought 9 more craft breweries and positioned themselves as sort of the trying to get to the top of the craft beer mountain in a way that they couldn't have without buying breweries. Like Anheuser-Busch could never innovate their way to the top of the craft beer mountain, which they are. They're, by some various metrics, either selling more beer or making more craft beer than any other company in the nation. Though actually that sort of gets tweaked a little bit now with the Boston Beer Dogfish hookup.
Right.
So I'm not sure what those numbers would look like now. But basically, Boston Beer and Anheuser Busch are the two biggest craft beer companies in the U.S. And Anheuser Busch basically made no legitimate, credible craft beer as recently as 8 years ago. I mean, Shock Top, and that was not really all that credible. And they bought these 10 breweries, and now now they make more than anyone. They're right up there with Boston Beer. So all this is to say that what the Goose Island sale ended up being more than just the Goose Island sale. It ended up really sort of portending Anheuser Busch's move into craft beer. So the narrative sort of changed from just the Goose Island story to really sort of the story of craft beer. So there's a very long answer to your question.
No, that was a great answer, and I kind of want to give a little background on your work history. So you work for the Chicago Tribune, like you
Correct,
said,
yeah.
And then you kind of got into the beer writing scene just as a kind of a
fell into it.
Yeah, you kind of fell into the beer writing. But
yeah.
I mean, you're in Chicago, so you're on the ground floor because Goose Island is out of Chicago.
Yeah.
So you're right there.
Yeah. So it was really it started out as a local story, for us. But the national reverberations were there right off the bat, because any beer geek worth his or her salt in 2011 knew exactly what Bourbon County Stout was.
Right.
Even lining up for beer wasn't quite then what it is now. So I mean, the culture was different. It was a much more sort of intimate culture then. But yeah, I mean, I went to Scandinavia, and gosh, I don't remember what year that was now, 2008 or 9 or something like that. And I remember I went into like the Good Beer Bar in Helsinki and looked up at, they had, the bars will sort of line the top of the bar with like the great beers that they've poured in the past.
Yeah.
And I remember looking up there and seeing a bottle of Bourbon County Stout. I was like, holy cow, Bourbon County Stout in Helsinki. Right. Like, this is it. It's
a big deal.
It was a phenomenon. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Goose also had a lot of crossover success with 312 Urban Wheat Ale and Honkers Ale. I mean, they'd sort of planted a lot of flags along the way. So it was both a local story, but also a broader story beyond. And again, it really did end up telling a broader story, because back in 2011, we didn't all know what Anheuser-Busch's plan was with its entry into craft beer. They didn't know, They were sort of figuring it out on the fly.
Mm-hmm. And that probably leads into some of their more, I don't want to say secretive business practices, but the fact that they keep things closer to the chest, it seems like. On the whole.
Yeah, that's sort of that wound up being a part of how they operate in the craft beer sphere.
Sure.
Is now you walk into it blows my mind. I walk in, so Jewel is like one of the big supermarkets in Chicago. So I walk into the Jewel, and you'll see this big Goose Island display in the cooler.
Yep.
And this is what I do for a living, so I'm able to sort of look at them and know, like, okay, that beer is brewed in Chicago, that beer was brewed by Anheuser-Busch in New York, that brew is brewed in Chicago by Goose Island, that one. So you've got this display of, say, 15 beers, and 8 of them were made by Goose Island in Chicago, 7 of them were made by Anheuser-Busch in New York or in Colorado, and customers are not meant to be able to discern the difference.
Right.
And it's
very
much in AB's interest is to just like insulate it as, this, like authentic Chicago brand, when in reality, most of the volume is being made by Anheuser-Busch. Now they've replicated that with the other breweries they've bought too.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, so that's like, one of the things where, I don't criticize Anheuser-Busch for their entry into craft beer. They did what they needed to do to stay relevant as a beer company, absolutely.
Right.
The one thing that I will advocate for and have on my blog and when I talk about this stuff is just transparency and honesty with the consumer, and so that the consumer is able to understand, like, okay, this IPA is actually, Goose Island IPA is now, and for all effects, Anheuser-Busch IPA, made by Anheuser-Busch. They slapped the Goose Island logo and label on it. But at the same time, Goose Island is doing some really good, authentic, great beer in Chicago.
Yeah.
But it's in AB's interest to sort of blur those lines a little bit, and that's how they operate. And it's, I think it's always something worth discussing and worth consumers understanding, and then consumers can, decide whether it matters or not from there. As far as I'm concerned, it's up to them.
Going back to the book a little bit more specifically, as you were writing this, or for someone who has never read it before, what would you say if there's one thing you can take away from reading this? If you had to distill it down to like an elevator pitch, let's say, what would that phrase be, or what was your favorite part of the research, or just like that one key thing that we should take away just from looking at this cover and saying like, hey, this might be something I'm interested in reading?
Probably, well, I think what I really like about the book is that it starts really small. Really small, with one guy having one idea. And literally, that is the first sentence of the book. John Hall having the idea to start Goose Island in 1980, I think it was 86. Goose opened in 88, so it was probably 86 when he first had the lightning bolt moment that, hey, there could be something in this craft beer thing.
Yeah.
And it starts impossibly small, and then the story just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and winds up with his little idea sold to the biggest beer company in the world, and then the biggest beer company in the world springboarding off his little idea into its much broader global strategy of basically commandeering craft beer. So I like that about the narrative, is that it starts tiny and ends up massive. It's about the fact that, sort of what we were just talking about, that the book is able to put in context for people what has happened with craft beer and what is happening with craft beer. The fact that things aren't always what they seem, and just a label isn't just a label, that there's a story behind the label, and the story may well be, well, this is Anheuser Busch's play to become craft beer dominant. Things that... Actually, I was talking with someone at this conference last night, and she said that she read the book and that she really appreciated it because it helped her sort of understand, just sort of connect the dots on what's happened with craft beer and Anheuser Busch's entry into it. And she said before she read it, she knew she was supposed to be upset about Anheuser Busch buying these breweries, but she didn't really understand why. And the book helped explain that to her. And I said to her, I don't think you're supposed to be upset. I mean, yes, there are people who are upset and they have reasons for them. And I'm happy to have written the book that helps you understand, the reasons that some people are upset. And if you're upset too and decide you don't want to, that's not how you want to spend your money, then great. Mm-hmm. But if someone reads the book and they decide, well, you know what, Anheuser-Busch are just great business people, and this is a brilliant strategy, and all I want to do is drink Anheuser-Busch beer and invest in the company. Right. Well, that's a reasonable outcome too. I'm just glad to be able to, again, connect the dots for people, help them sort of understand what has transpired in craft beer, really, going back 40 years to the beginning, but even more relevant maybe in the last 10 years is like this AB strategy has started to unfold, and craft beer has really blown up. Sure. And then, but for people to draw their own conclusions, it's, there's no axe to grind here. It's just telling the story of what, where craft beer came from, where it is, and hopefully where it's going.
Yeah, really putting that journalistic touch on it, where you're presenting the information with trying to be as little biased as possible.
Hopefully, yeah, right. Yeah. But I do think it's also inescapable that if you just look at the facts, Anheuser-Busch is not a beacon of transparency, Correct. And I think transparency for consumers, people being conscious of how they spend their money, and what it means when they spend their money, is a great thing no matter what, and it's true of our shoes or our refrigerators, our cars, and our beer. It's just beer is the thing I happen to write about. But right. Yeah, I'd love to be completely conscious of how each of my dollars is spent, and it's hard to do as a consumer, right? But beer is one way that we're sort of able to engage on that right. front.
Or you'd like to think so, at the very least.
Yeah, well, I think beer actually is easier. I think it's easier to sort of to wrap your brain around who makes your beer and where it's made, as compared to your clothes. Because I mean, clothes are just so like utilitarian, and beer is the product of all these small business. I mean, it's 7,500 breweries. It's 7,500 well, not quite 7,500, but let's say 7,200 small businesses, and small business owners in your community. And, patronizing them that's a meaningful thing.
Right.
I don't think they're worth patronizing just because they're small businesses in your community. The beer needs to be good, and this beer happens to be delicious. It's made by a small brewery here in Montana. But, if the quality's there and there's the opportunities to, support a local business person, why wouldn't you, right?
Right. Absolutely. Agreed. Just to kind of wrap up, we're running out of time.
I thought we were just getting started.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, that's the technology that we have with video. Was there in a somewhat short answer? Was there any?
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Was there?
You figured me out.
Was there any pushback like from Goose Island or Anheuser Busch or anything when this book came out?
Not really. I'm not sure they necessarily loved the book.
Right.
And if they did, then I didn't do my job.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They never said you got this wrong or this wasn't fair or anything like that.
Sure.
So yeah, again, they don't love it, but if they loved it, then I probably wouldn't have done my job.
Right.
But yeah, most importantly is there's no sense that anything was wrong or unfair.
So
they've been, they're good people there. And they're respectful of what I do, and I'm respectful of what they do. But I also just felt like what they do also deserves
needed to be called out
some
a little
discussion.
bit. Yeah,
well, just discussion, and again, like just some sunlight shining in on sort of how the beer industry and craft beer in particular operates.
Sure. So if people want to buy this book, where's the best place they can go? And we'll put the link below.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The best place. I mean, honestly, I would say go, shop at your local indie
bookstore. Yeah.
Yeah.
Support
a lot
that
of
local small business again.
Yeah. I mean, why not? If they don't have it on the shelf, they can definitely order it for you. But at the same time, I'm also aware that we live in the 21st century, and it's on Amazon if you want to buy it on Amazon. I mean, I try to shop local when I can, and sometimes when I just need like some mousetraps for my basement, I buy them on Amazon.
Right.
So, but yeah, the book's around, and it's done well, and hopefully will continue to do well, and people have been interested, and it's been really fun to talk about, and appreciate you guys having me.
Well, we appreciate you being on, and we'll put all the links to like your social medias and that kind of stuff too. So if people want to read your blog and that kind of thing, they can check out more about
Thanks. Yeah,
what you're writing about craft beer.
Yeah, my blog is just joshnoel.net. Not very creative.
Yeah.
But I've continued to sort of keep up with the story of the book on the blog, because I stopped writing, what are we in, 2019 now? So I probably stopped writing in 2017. And of course, things keep happening, so I just sort of keep up with them on the blog, though I haven't blogged since January. But
well, they can go back and read the archive.
Yeah. Now there's some additional book extras there, we'll call it.
Sure.
But yeah, the book is really sort of that's got the meat of the story. So.
Awesome.
Right. Well, thank you, guys. That's bourbon barrel aged stout and selling out.
Yes.
So
Goose Island, Anheuser Busch, and how craft beer became big business.
That's right.
Correct.
So thank you again for being on, and make sure you check us out on all the social medias, and you can see more about this, and Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. And if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe now. We'll see you next week, everybody.
Cheers.
Prost.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, you can click down below where there's some more episodes for you to watch. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on episodes that you do watch. We hope to see you next time.